Thank you for joining us for SafetyFOCUS Connect. We would like to thank our premier sponsor, Amazon, and our champion sponsors, Draeger and Granger. We truly appreciate their support of ASSP, our members, and this event. Our keynote speaker, ASSP Public Director and Alaska Tanker's former CEO, Anil Mathur, will discuss the company's safety journey that used mindfulness to achieve a higher level of operational success. He will talk about what mindfulness is and the benefits it can provide in any industry. Please enjoy the presentation.
Good morning, and welcome to our keynote discussion on mindfulness and how it can play an important role at companies everywhere, not only for advancing safety, but to reach a higher level of operational success. I'm Blaine Croggy with ASSP, and I'm joined today by ASSP's Public Director, Anil Mathur, the recently retired CEO of Alaska Tanker Company. The company operates oil tankers by sea from Alaska to California, Washington, and Hawaii. During Anil's tenure that spanned 2 decades, Alaska Tanker transported 2 billion barrels of oil without any ocean spills and logged 23 million worker hours with just 1 minor lost time injury. His phenomenal safety record also led to major reductions in insurance premiums and claims costs. Anil has received personal letters of commendation from the governors of Alaska and Washington State. Thanks for your time today, Anil.
Thank you.
Before we get started, I want to remind our attendees that during this presentation, you can type comments and questions into the chat box for a real-time interaction. Thank you. So Anil, how is retirement treating you over there on the beautiful West Coast?
Retirement is awesome, Blaine. Highly recommended.
Excellent.
If you can afford it.
The West Coast isn't the cheapest area of the country. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, sort of. I mean, if you can't afford it, then work towards it. Blaine, I worked for 42 years, and I never had even a single day without a full-time job, even though I changed jobs twice. My wife's a chemical engineer. She was working. So what this has done is it has allowed us more time at home together, more so with COVID-19, but it's something that I really enjoy. When in the nature of my work, I was always had one foot in the present, one foot looking out, whatever was going on in the moment, I'd be thinking about what are the implications of it. Is this positioning us in the right way? Mm-hmm. So I never really got a chance to live the moment fully, at least as fully as I can in retirement.
Well, you sound like a very mindful person, so you're perfect for this topic today. So let's start with a definition of mindfulness, just so we're all on the same page. I think it typically means staying in the moment, clearing away distractions, and being purposeful in thought. Am I on the right track, Anil?
Yes. I dug out a definition by a fellow called John Kabat-Zinn, who's pretty much a guru on this, He says, mindfulness means paying attention in a particular way, on purpose, in the present moment, and non-judgmentally. But Blaine, I wanted to let the definition come in. It's a way of being. So like most things, it's better to practice it and do it rather than talk about it.
Mm-hmm. So my next question, and you've begun to talk about that, whether mindfulness is a frame of mind or whether it's a learned skill or whether it's both.
Yeah. So if you break an individual into having a mindset, a skill set, and a tool set, mindfulness is more about a mindset. It's a way of being. And so that has certain implications in the way it is trained and implemented.
Okay.
Endemic to being human, actually, is the fact that the mind wanders. You can't help that. And the extent and severity of the mind wandering is exacerbated by stress. So mindfulness is a way of becoming aware of how you're paying attention. And most importantly, becoming aware when you get distracted. And what you have to do is just kind of gently acknowledge that, but then bring your mind back in the moment, in the conversation, in the interaction that you're having.
Interesting. Let's go.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
No, the other thing I wanted to throw in there is the concept of mindfulness applied to safety is validated by neuroscience. So that was huge for us in actually being successful over 10 years. We've been at it for 10 years at Alaska Tanker Company.
Mm-hmm.
The fact that it was validated by science and we were able to demonstrate that went a huge way into its acceptance, at least in 80s and Alaska Tanker Company.
Mm-hmm. And I wanted to ask about, you just mentioned that you've been sort of at this for 10 years as far as the mindfulness element of safety. So it wasn't always a component of what you've been doing there. So tell us the story about how you sort of discovered this mindfulness element and how you came across it.
Okay. Well, let me first say that about our journey and how it fit into Alaska Tanker Company's journey, if I may.
Mm-hmm.
So when I joined Alaska Tanker Company, we were a mediocre tanker company with a mediocre safety record. We were having a lost time injury every month. So, if you were a statistician, we'd have killed several people by now if we continued that way. Given its mediocrity, Blaine, it was not a time and a place to introduce mindfulness. So we started out with a culture that was disciplinarian and management-led.
Okay.
This is the way you'll do the job. You don't like it, get the heck off the ship. And our safety performance improved dramatically. But that kind of onerous way of being will only take you so far.
Mm-hmm.
And then slowly we merge into what I'd call for several years in the early 2000s into a frame of not management-led, but team-led. We had achieved enough inertia that people actually wanted not to get hurt as a team.
Mm-hmm.
And then teamwork took us to a lost time injury frequency rate of about 0.2. But we wanted to get to 0. And that part of the journey was divided into 3 steps. The first was emotional intelligence. The second was wellness. And the last component of that was mindfulness. So the reason I'm going through that is to say that, horses for courses kind of thing. You don't want a racehorse if the name of the game is an obstacle race. So you really can't do mindfulness in a culture that is compliant.
Okay, it's a next level element where you've got to be sort of beyond the compliance part of it before really considering mindfulness?
Yeah, you have to have achieved the benefits of compliance. You have to have achieved the benefits of teamwork. And at least for us, that was the way it was. I'm not saying it has to be that way for everyone.
Mm-hmm.
But in our environment, it became very inspirational.
And covering those statistics again, which I find amazing. So you were saying there was a lost time injury every month, and then you reached the point where you had one lost time injury over a 20-year period. So are you saying really mindfulness definitely played a role in that. It's a necessary role to achieve that level of safety success?
Okay, so first of all, let me say I'm not a theorist. Okay? There are people who know infinitely more about these things. For me, it was much more of a visceral. I've run hazardous operations most of my career in the North Sea, on the North Slope of Alaska. It's the kind of thing that turns me on. So as far as the role of mindfulness, it is a way of being where the worker himself finds a way to make himself safe.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
The means to that end, and it fits in that continuum.
Okay. And I want to get more into that in just a minute. First, I want you to go back for us and talk about how you discovered mindfulness. Because again, like you were saying, you've been at it for 10 years, but before that, it was not an element that you were aware of. So how did all of that come about?
It came about by accident. When I worked at BP before I ran Alaska Tanker Company, and my boss's boss, guy's name is Byron Grote. He was the chief financial officer for BP. And he told me, because I'd worked for him in a different incarnation, he said, Anil, I want to ride a tanker. So I said, sure. And he said, can I bring my wife along? I said, sure. So she came along. And they rode from Bellingham, Washington to Valdez. So when they disembarked, I actually went to Valdez and had dinner with him. And his wife, who for all practical purposes for me was Mrs. Byron Grote. She, at dinner, while we are having our steak, says, the principles of safety your team follows are embedded in mindfulness. So I said, gee, isn't that nice? And would you like some more wine kind of thing? And then, Blaine, I went back to my hotel room and I thought, what the hell did she say? So I called this lady up who was, for me, Mrs. Byron Grote. It turns out her name is Susan Miller, and she's actually a professor at New York University. And she is a neuroscientist. And I asked her, Susan, what the heck did you mean, And she started explaining what mindfulness was and why she said what she said. And I was quite enamored by that. And then, she's been a very good friend for a long time. And she started showing me, Blaine, all these principles of neuroscience and what happens to the mind when you're mindful. So just as a side, you can now do functional MRIs of the brain, which actually record which parts of the brain are engaged when you have a certain way of being. Mm-hmm. And those brain scans actually show how a mindful brain is working. We then took that science and showed it to all our staff, our workers. And, being technical in nature, it was compelling. The evidence was compelling. So that's how we got into it.
Okay. And how was that received when it was presented to your staff and the neurological components? And it can get very complex, obviously. And so how do you feel that was initially received?
Well, I was very apprehensive. You're talking to a sailor who's got his finger up his nose and you're talking mindfulness. But that presentation of Susan's at the conference was supposed to last for 45 minutes. It lasted 3 hours.
Wow.
She finished in 40 minutes and there was just this Q&A, and so it totally messed up the conference, but it achieved the purpose.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, it can be very fascinating, obviously. So let me ask you, what are some of the ways that workers in any industry can personally achieve mindfulness on the job And do you think it starts with us putting our smartphones down?
Yeah. So there's a couple of questions in that. I think mindfulness is achieved through competencies in emotional intelligence. And those are self-awareness and introspection. I think, Blaine, that most learning that sticks has to come from within.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll kind of go, this is kind of a mouthful, but deep introspection. When you can ask yourself, hey, why am I doing this job this way? Could there be a better way of doing it? That introspection, when coupled with advocacy for a safer way of being, that creates the environment, Blaine, in which people of their own volition will slowly but permanently change their way of working into a safer way.
Okay, so it comes from within, and
so mindfulness is promoted by emotional intelligence. I'm sorry, what was the second part of your question?
Oh, I was thinking, does it start with putting our smartphones down? Obviously, that's a good way to achieve mindlessness, but we're looking for mindfulness and being more focused.
You know, I've thought a little bit about that. And there's different kinds of focus, okay? And not everything requires the same level of focus. And mindfulness will teach you that. So as an example, if you're a chief engineer on the tanker in the middle of the Pacific Ocean in a storm and the ship loses power, you need a certain kind of awareness. You need focus, laser focus. If you're an able-bodied seaman standing watch, to see what other tankers are around, you need situational awareness. That's a different kind of focus. So being able to dial in the appropriate kind of focus and to be aware that that's what you're doing, that is mindfulness. It doesn't mean that you do only one thing at one time in the traditional sense. Because, if you look at an expert carpenter, for example, he knows when he has to focus more. And he'll talk to you during his job, but when those key times come, he's a different kind of guy. So all the accidents that the guy had from being a rookie to becoming an expert, we are trying to shorten that and avoid those incidents so that people develop this expertise mindset, which is aided by mindfulness.
Interesting. And I think with that explanation, I think you partially at least answered my next question, which was going to be, is mindfulness something that a supervisor or safety professional can simply tell workers to do, or is it the result of a personal commitment from within? And you're saying really it's got to come from within, and it's not someone walking around, hey, be mindful, or is it a little of both?
Yeah. Well, I didn't mean to convey that leadership has no role in mindfulness. If I did, I made a mistake. I didn't mean to do that. I think as a leader, what you have to do, Blaine, is create an environment where it is psychologically safe. And there's a professor, Amy Edmondson at Harvard. She talks a lot about this. As a supervisor, you create an environment where a person can access within himself the environment to be safe. But ultimately, I am a great believer that all change meaningful, lasting change has to come from within.
And when you're talking about creating that environment and thinking back at what you did at Alaska Tanker, what were some of those components? How do you create the environment? I mean, you mentioned one of the things you did, you brought the neurological aspect in and sort of had a presentation and had people sort of see the role of sort of the brain and how all of that worked. What other types of things did you do to achieve that complete environment?
Well, many things. Let me give you an example. Listening to someone when they are speaking, a worker or a colleague, is the most leveraging thing you can do. So when the worker experiences the sensation of being fully heard, he's more amenable to listening. It's like having a cup, and let's assume it's full of water. And when you're trying to say something, you're putting more water into it. Well, it'll freaking overflow, right? So the worker has to empty his cup first. He has to speak, and he has to experience the sensation of being listened to, so that now he feels you understand him. And therefore, what you are saying after that actually fits for him. So this isn't something as a leader you talk about, it's something you do. As you walk about the engine room and you engage a person in a safety conversation, the way in which you do it matters much, much more to the worker and is much more illustrative than, talking about it.
Mm-hmm. You need to be open to that two-way communication. You're not just giving the orders, but there are times where you have to be quiet and hear what the workers are saying to you.
Yeah, well, the good Lord gave us 2 years and 1 month. There's this thing that we should use them in that proportion.
Yes. I want to ask what you think are the main benefits of a work approach that includes mindfulness. Why do it? What are those key goals that are achieved?
Well, the key goal is I am a business kind of guy, right? I'm an alumni of Harvard. The main business goal is it's better for business. It resulted in much, much lower operating costs. I think I said this. Our total fleet repair budget was greater than our savings from reduced injuries. In other words, the savings and reduced injuries the cost of those, paid for the entire fleet-wide voyage repair.
Wow.
But that's not why I did it. It happens to be the best reason to do it for a business kind of guy. But the three things I'd say on, how does it help? The first thing is it promotes a culture of caring. The second thing I'd say is it helps in paying attention in execution, as well as job design, as well as equipment design. And if you're in a mindful state, the third thing is it's much less likely that things will get overlooked.
Mm-hmm. And then, of course, your safety record, which really increased to the level that a lot of companies are looking for when you're talking about one lost time injury over 2 decades. I mean, it looks like it really paid dividends in that regard.
Yeah, Blaine. BP had 70 time charterers, tanker companies around the world. And their CEO used to invite us every year, and we'd all get together and we'd share all our statistics. And there wasn't a single tanker company in that group that had a better and longer lasting safety record than we did.
Wow.
There were flashes in the pan, where people would achieve it for a year, two, but no one kind of gets it for 20 years. Now, was it caused by mindfulness? I think so. Why do I think so? Because I'd go to the job and look at the quality of the job safety analysis. I'd look at the interaction. In a safety meeting, if the foreman, in our case it's a bosun, is the one who's doing all the talking, it's really not a very effective safety meeting. If the person who's actually going to do the job says, okay, bosun, this is the way I'm going to do it. These are the different steps. These are the things that go wrong. That's much more effective. And there is neuroscience to back that up.
Mm-hmm.
It turns out, Blaine, that our expertise is stored in long-term memory. But in the moment that you're actually working, the only portion of your brain you have access to is the prefrontal cortex. In the process of talking, the neural circuits that connect the long-term memory light up. The neural circuits between the long-term memory and the prefrontal cortex. So that in that moment, that expertise is in front of your mind. It turns out the prefrontal cortex has very limited space. So after you've done the job, something else comes in and takes up that space. So the quality of the conversation, how participative is it? All these things made me think there was a causal link between mindfulness and the safety record.
Mm-hmm.
Can I prove it? No. Do I care to prove it? No. I mean, who cares?
Well, I think your safety record proved it, but
I mean, I like I said, I'm not a theorist, Blaine. I just know it worked. And through my experience and my observation, there was a link.
mm-hmm.
And that was good enough for me.
Of course. And I'm looking at my next question here, and you've partially answered this, but I want to get into this. How did you help your team at Alaska Tanker Company keep mindfulness as a daily objective and a strong part of your safety culture, especially given that habitual and repetitive tasks can lead to mindlessness, which is the opposite? So, earlier you did talk about the environment and creating that. Generally speaking, but boy, when you're showing up to work every day, you may be doing the same tasks. Are there things that you saw that were helpful to people on a daily basis?
Yeah. I think it's like riding a bike.
Mm-hmm.
Mindfulness is, once you learn it and it becomes part of you, it's there. And there are three things. The first is you become aware when you're getting distracted. Then they had understood the science of it, so they deeply believed in it. And so like the steward assistant on the ship, I mean, he makes beds. He makes everyone's beds. He's done that 10,000 times, right? I mean, he's been doing it for 30 years. And now you tell him about doing the job safety analysis about making up a bed. So the task is repetitive. But the principle of mindfulness is to calibrate the right level of attention at the right time. In the moment that he's lifting up the mattress to tuck the bed sheet in, he needs to be mindful of his back. When he's patting down the sheet, he doesn't have to be as mindful. So I think, Blaine, what happens is when you become an expert, you learn these things by instinct.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that goes a long way. But it would be a mistake to think that if you're being mindful, you cannot pick up your cell phone. Because you just need to know, okay, I'm now going to pick up my cell phone, and therefore I'm going to pay less attention to Blaine at the moment. And that's okay.
So it's, I was going to say, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I'm sorry. I'm babbling perhaps. It's important to know what's going on in your head rather than let it just happen. To be able to observe your own thinking is what mindfulness achieves.
And like you've said, based on the task, it's a matter of learning what you should be thinking about at any given time. And like you were saying with the mattress example, when I'm lifting, pay attention to my back, and hey, that can be easy to forget or easy to not pay attention to. But once you've learned through a process, where does my mind need to be at each of these moments, it becomes second nature, I guess, where you're not necessarily directly thinking about it every day.
Well, a less trivial example is if you're a chief engineer on a tanker and you're doing your safety rounds. You pay attention to different things around the compressor. You're more conscious of the vibration of it. You're listening to the sound of the engine, the frequency and the volume, the decibels of it. And that's very, very different than when you're talking to someone. It's so you just learn. What mindfulness does is it promotes that awareness of what is it that you really need to be paying attention to.
I know that some people, when you begin to look into mindfulness, there are some people out there saying that multitasking is the enemy of mindfulness. And, given that we're all busy and trying to get our jobs done, is it possible to be a multitasker but still exhibit mindfulness?
Absolutely. Okay. Blaine, think with me about a person standing watch on the bridge. Let's say you're taking the tanker into Singapore and you're standing watch. There are 50 other tankers around you. That kind of situational awareness requires multitasking. That kind of awareness of situations is, in a sense, multitasking, because you're going from one thing that is distinct from the other. You're approaching a bridge now. So you have to dial in the appropriate level of awareness, which is not always 100%. Not everything needs 100% of your attention. And know that, and make a conscious choice that at this time I will also, look at this other thing. Getting distracted is endemic to the human nature. It's in our DNA, I think, So just becoming aware of it and then managing it, controlling it, that is the essential skill that mindfulness brings. It is not a recipe, nor does it advocate being 100% attention to everything all the time. You'd freaking go nuts.
You don't want to do that.
No.
But what was interesting, what you just said is being aware when those distractions are happening. And that is definitely a part of mindfulness, and knowing, okay, this is not where my mind needs to be right now, perhaps. Maybe my mind does need to be there, but in many cases it may not. Just being aware of those moments to sort of course correct quickly.
Yeah, exactly. What happens, Blaine, is, you can be talking, like I go to the tankers all the time, and a lot of the interactions are, quite frankly, a waste of time. You're standing there and you're talking to this able-bodied seaman, and 90% of what he's saying is freaking irrelevant. But when he is going to say something that's relevant, it's interspersed in that I was telling Chris the other day, important things don't always have bells and whistles attached to them. So much of what people argue against mindlessness, it's because the person is not paying attention to them.
Mm-hmm.
So even though the conversation for you with the able-bodied seaman may not be very fruitful, for him it is. I mean, you're the CEO, you're standing and talking to him. He feels important, he feels relevant. There's this saying, people will forget what you say. They may even forget what you do, but they'll never forget how you make them feel.
Mm-hmm. Which is why that listening component is so important, so valuable. Do you think that component in itself, that's got to be a challenge when you are managing a lot of people, and like you were saying, you're trying to be a proponent of two-way communication, which requires the other person listening. What kind of a challenge is that to make listening, a key element there of daily work life out there?
I happen to think, because it was important, I spent a lot of my time doing that. I mean, it may sound flippant, but as a CEO, I really didn't have that much to do. I mean, the company kind of ran, there were rules, there were processes, there was teamwork. I had trained my team, my direct reports. The company was running fine, thank you very much, kind of thing. And so the question, the related important way to look at this is spreading culture. And if you take the time to listen carefully to a person, he will then mirror that behavior with his subordinates. There's no point in sending someone to listening classes and then freaking ignoring them.
Mm-hmm.
Because he'll think that's what's the class, this is what you've got to really do. They'll do what they experience you doing to them.
So lead by example on site, which is a great bit of advice.
That's infinitely better said, yes.
Mm-hmm. Because when you develop a strong work culture that includes things like that, employees tend to, like you were saying, follow along and begin to mirror those same qualities that they are seeing every day from those around them.
Blaine, now that you've said that, several years ago in my company, we pivoted from a safety culture to a culture of caring. And that yielded such phenomenal benefits. Because when a worker feels that you actually care, the way they will engage and the quality of the conversation they will bring up, things that they would otherwise have not mentioned to you, they will now, because A, you're listening, and the second thing is you care.
Mm-hmm.
We had a card, a 3x5 card, where people could write down any hazardous condition or hazardous behavior they observed. So if, the third engineer is walking down and he touches a pipe and he says, "Ooh, that was hot, I could have burned my hand," and he puts that down on a piece of paper. And then you actually go fix it. That will promote hazardous condition reporting infinitely more than talking about it.
Mm-hmm.
Mindfulness and these principles I'm talking about are transferred by doing.
And it's interesting how everything really is, everything interacts, right? I mean, if someone is feeling cared about, I mean, they probably are going to naturally be more mindful, and it's all interconnected when you're looking at the wider safety environment picture.
Yeah, Amy Edmondson talks a lot about this in her psychological safety thing. In a culture of caring, people will feel free and of their own volition bring up hazardous conditions and unsafe acts.
It's true. Yeah. Let me, so we've talked a lot about mindfulness, and let me ask you, do you think mindfulness is an overlooked component of a comprehensive safety program?
Overlooked? I wouldn't say kind of overlooked, but it's more a case of not being aware of the science of mindfulness, that it's out there and that it can actually be linked to safety. That was pioneering work at Alaska Tanker Company. You know, you open any magazine, it's full of stuff about mindfulness, but no one had linked it to safety as much as we had, you know, when we started our mindfulness journey. And to me, Blaine, that is the essence of creativity. To take two things that seem in different fields, safety, mindfulness, and then saying, hey, there's a connection here.
Mm-hmm.
It's not overlooked in the traditional sense of overlooked, Blaine.
Mm-hmm.
There's more a case of this is a linkage that'll help me.
Mm-hmm. But I mean, do you think enough companies have it as part of their safety culture, as part of their safety programs? Are enough companies aware of it? Like you were saying, you became aware of it about 10 years ago, but you were not aware of it prior to that. Is it one of those components that, boy, we really need to spread the word here as far as the value of being mindful?
Yeah, I'm only smiling because it can be hazardous to the health of a CEO to be telling his financial analysts about mindfulness. I think there is a component of skepticism in these things. I don't think most CEOs have my kind of background, which makes, a lot of safety is visceral, Blaine. You see bad things happening. Mm-hmm. You realize, look at any safety incident investigation. The first words out of the guy's mouth would be, I never thought. It never occurred to me. I didn't think, it's all about paying attention in the moment, at least to me.
Mm-hmm.
There's this saying, to a hammer, everything looks like a nail. Maybe I'm like that about mindfulness. I don't know.
Well, we're nearing. Go ahead.
No, that's fine.
I was going to say we're nearing the end of our time. I've got one last question to throw your way here. And you talked a little bit about this early in our discussion, but want to revisit it again. On the wide-ranging safety spectrum that has basic compliance on one end and total worker health on the other, where do you see mindfulness fitting in? And can it be one of the first elements implemented?
Yeah. Well, not in a compliance environment, mm-hmm. but it is a very good stepping stone toward total worker health.
Because what would happen? Let's say you're at a compliance point as far as your safety initiatives. What's the drawback of trying to go to mindfulness from that compliance point?
Well, there's two. First is it wouldn't work.
Mm-hmm.
You're best off talking to people when they're willing to listen. And that's not the kind of stuff people want to listen to. At Prudhoe, we had to wear all the stuff to keep us safe from the cold, right? So they'd come in for the safety meeting and they wouldn't even take off their parkas because they couldn't frickin' wait to get out of the frickin' safety meeting. Now, you're going to talk to this guy about mindfulness? Seriously? he can't wait to get out of there. He's just sitting there wondering, when the heck will you shut up and let me go do my work?
So you've got to have a more established safety program in order to bring that mindfulness element into it for it to be successful.
The worst, it's that horses for courses thing. I think, Blaine, the biggest mistake you can make is bringing it on at the wrong time. And then there's a cynicism towards it. And later in your journey, when you try and come back to it, they say, I tried that, didn't work.
And did you see any of that when you went down that road of mindfulness? Any cynicism? Any, why are you telling us this? Why are you, getting all of the neurosciences involved in what I'm trying to do every day? And any?
The answer is no. And I'll tell you, but it was my biggest fear.
Mm-hmm.
Because by that time, we already had taught people emotional intelligence. So there are many competencies that make up emotional intelligence: self-awareness, awareness of others, awareness of your impact on others, impulse control. These things can actually be taught. So by the time we brought mindfulness on, they'd already learned. They had much deeper level of emotional intelligence than in the compliance part of our journey. They were willing to listen because whatever we had done had worked.
Interesting. And how about when new employees join the organization? Once you've got this established, that becomes easier. Like you said earlier, people tend to follow along with what they're seeing from their coworkers, from their supervisors. Is that the case? Once it's established, even bringing new people into the system is easier?
Oh, absolutely. You don't have to, as a leader, you don't have to do squat. Your team will, seriously. I mean, if you're greasing a winch, right, the winch that ties the boat to the ship, a mistake by someone else, you can end up losing your hand, man. So it is hugely important to your co-workers that this newcomer be safe. And they have ways of communicating that as a supervisor are illegal. And, when you achieve critical mass,
mm-hmm.
and the culture is one of promoting a safe way of being, and it's explicit and it's okay to talk about it, then new people come on board very easily. Besides, it's something that's, there was this third engineer whose wife wrote me an email and said, I don't know what you did with Don, but he's a lot easier to live with right now. It affects your way of being.
So you've got that magical impact on people, right, Anil? Just your way, and you just changing people, and even their home lives are better now.
I mean, I'd love to take credit for all this, but that's not the case. When I was younger, I'd be paid compliments like that, and I'd say, "Oh no, it's the team," and I'd say that because that was the right thing to say. But now, deep in my heart, I actually believe that. I mean, I'm not on the tankers. They're 500 miles in the Pacific Ocean, man. And they are the ones day in, day out, every day, one job at a time, keeping the environment safe. So I think it's correct that I helped create it, but it's not there because of me. It's there because they want it.
Well, you're a humble man. I mean, your accomplishments have been impressive. You really achieved a lot over there at Alaska Tanker, and appreciate all of the knowledge you've passed along to us today. I don't have any other questions, so I think we'll wrap here. That brings us to the end of our discussion this morning on mindfulness, and I want to again thank Anil for taking time to share his knowledge and experiences on the topic.
And
I also want, yes, Anil?
Things more that didn't come
Yeah,
up.
what else? What else do you have for us?
That I wanted to say, this is more from neurology, what we've learned from neurology. Whenever your senses pick something up,
Mm-hmm.
it goes through a portion of the brain called the amygdala. And the amygdala is responsible for the 4 Fs: the fight, the flight, the freeze. I'll leave the 4th F. So those are the very primal instincts because of, where mankind originated from. And in the fractions of seconds, what mindfulness does, Blaine, is in the fractions of seconds before you react because of the sensation from the amygdala, is to develop a calibrated response that is proportionate to what is being said. So it's not a reaction, but it's a well thought through. With mindfulness, it teaches you to take that breath and not react. I just wanted to throw that out.
Yeah, it's interesting, and it reminds me of what you said earlier with the 45-minute presentation ended up going 3 hours. It gets very fascinating when you get into all of these different areas and how they components of the mind and how they impact each individual. And I feel like we could talk for the next 3 hours about this, but I don't think our attendees want that right now. So we will, we'll bring things to a close. And I want to thank all of our attendees for being here this morning for this keynote. And I hope you enjoy everything that SafetyFOCUS will bring your way, not only today, but over the next 2 weeks. Enjoy the event.